doing at any given point in time, because information that's relevant to one person in one context here is irrelevant to someone else with doing something else over here. So I think that's part of it. Another big challenge is the nature of sustainability.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Actionable ESG Talk series brought to you by AKFI Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first nonprofit industry association committed to bridge the gap between ESG sustainability and digital transformation. My name is Isabella. I am the co-host here with Manuel Wexler, another co-host, also the executive director at the AKFI. Thanks to this talk series, we get to bring together great minds to together discuss the current state and the future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. Today, here with us is Jennifer. Good to see you again. Jen has been joining us for one time already, and she's our valuable returning guest. And hi, Jen.
So it's so great to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Hi
Always
Jen,
good.
and haven't been for a while.
Yeah, it's been
Haven't
a
seen each
while.
other for a while.
Yeah, it has been. Yep. Yep. Lots has changed and lots is the same.
And for those who's meeting Jen for the first time, Dr. Jennifer Boger, let me introduce that. Jen is the co-founder and the chief science officer at the ESG.ai, which is a platform that combines machine learning and natural language processing to provide companies with insights into their ESG performance. And Jian is also the adjunct professor in systems design engineering at the University of Waterloo. And she has been giving keynotes presentations at several international conferences. She's also the board member on leading organizations and journals. She has authored over 100 peer-reviewed publications. Again, welcome back, Jen. Let's start a conversation. What are your thoughts on the current sustainability, ESG, and artificial intelligence? What's new? What's old? What hasn't changed?
That's an enormous question. That would take many podcasts, many webinars to answer. Lots is changing. One of the biggest game changers that's happening right now is the enormous influx of ESG data. I think that's something that's ramping up really fast in this space, which is enabling a lot more of the AI capabilities to then start being executed in ways that make sense. So, as many, I'm sure you guys and many of your listeners know, AI often requires large amounts of data to perform well, especially when you're asking it to do problem solving or recommendations or whatever you're using it for on complex spaces. It needs to have, just like humans, it needs to have lots of examples of, in this situation, this tends to happen. In this situation, this tends to happen. And without a lot of examples, with all the necessary data and several different viewpoints of the same problem space, it's not going to be able to make good decisions, right? It has to learn and it has to see enough examples of appropriate data that is complete and accurate to be able to then perform good decision making. So something that's happening now is that there's a lot more laws, regulations around data disclosure that are starting to go into play internationally, as well as a lot of stakeholders, including investors, are demanding more transparency from corporates on what their ESG data are. And those two things are really starting to drive a lot more corporate disclosure, as well as a lot more standardized corporate disclosure on data, which then drives the whole operationalization of data collection and disclosure by corporates. So that's the other big piece that's really happening is corporates, because they're being asked to disclose all this data, they're starting to really look at, okay, what data do I have? What data are missing? What is material to me? What is material to my stakeholders? What aligns with my mission values? What aligns with my 1, 5, 10-year plan? All these very complex questions that really need to be answered by companies before they can then start sensibly putting in data collection practices in place, the type that are necessary to really start driving AI. So we're really start seeing, especially the leaders and the larger corporates in the space, are really starting to move past just the what stage into implementation stage of an internal and semi-automated data collection systems, which then, now we're seeing internal data lakes starting to be really built in this space, which then enables better reporting and more consistent reporting of data. So that's a big one that really underpins so much of what is necessary to make AI sing in this space.
Not to scare anybody, but I think it's more to come as we progress with our conversation, because there are layers and layers of questions. But you mentioned materiality. And materiality seems to be now the theme for regulations and for reporting. And you touched already on materiality, but when we combine materiality and AI, facing the challenge of the data not only being accurate, must be in order to have a proper AI training, but also has to be auditable, has to be detailed. Any thoughts on how we combine materiality and AI, and maybe what phase in this process are? You already mentioned large corporations starting.
Yeah, no, it's a really excellent question. And so it always goes back to what's the problem being solved, right? And who's looking at it, and how much data is there, and how much accuracy do you require, and how much room for error is there, and all these different questions. Materiality is a tricky one because it's often hard to divine, but at the same time, it's extremely important for every player in the field to clearly articulate what data or what information are reasonable for their operations, what is relevant to their operations, and not just the what, but the why, right? And you're seeing reports such as CSRD, for example. A lot of people are familiar with that. That's the big set of regs for corporates in the EU around sustainability, climate, ESG reporting, where it's being staggered out how much and who has to report. But at the end of the day, by 2028, it now is every company operating within the EU space, whether they're foreign multinationals or based out of the EU, is going to have to submit a CSRD. And a big push for this, frankly, is for that very question. It's to drive a structured way of reporting that's not overly prescribed. So the idea of the CSRD is there are a bunch of quantitative data that are required from companies, but there's also a large amount of qualitative data that is asked for as well. So it's giving space for corporates to explain their data, which is really important. So not just what are your numbers, but why are they what they are? Where are you going next? How do you reasonably feel you're going to meet these targets? And the idea here is not to penalize. It's not a you're good, you're bad kind of analysis for companies, but rather transparency, so that then stakeholders can make more informed decisions about risk and what that means to them. So one of the biggest pushbacks often on ESG data is inevitably a company, no matter what the framework is, companies will come and be like, well, these data are not applicable to me. And it's frustrating because I'm being penalized because it's asking for data, which has no bearing on what I do. Or the other side of the coin, you're not collecting data that is very material to me. One example we come across in Canada often is there's a lot of resource extraction in Canada. There's a lot of mining companies that spend an enormous amount of time and effort with Indigenous relationships, and because that's very important. If you do not have good Indigenous relationships, not only is that going to make operations difficult, it's impossible. You cannot get your license, you cannot get insurance. And there are some companies that do genuinely want to have long-term relationships on good terms and have Indigenous populations leading decision-making, participating in the company's operations that are local to that group and all the things. And they get so frustrated because they're not differentiated from other companies that might not be. So, where in a lot of ESG, we think now back to sort of a lot of the ESG, especially Eurocentric ESG raters and data providers, where's room for that kind of a discussion and that kind of expression for that type of operation. So back to your question, the materiality when it comes to AI. Now you've got to layer AI onto that whole paradigm of companies feel like it's difficult to express what's material to them in the first place, and then to convey data that shows where they're positioned and gives stakeholders a view into where the company feels it's at and where it's going. And then you need AI on top of it to interpret that. It's a very hard problem. Where we're at right now with respect to that is a lot of the reporting directives, including CSRD, for example, have taxonomies that they are requiring issuers to report on using these taxonomies and formats of reports that are more readily machine readable, so that at least we can start tagging data with headings that are, you're going to find this type of data in this section, and these tables are set up this way, which can help a lot with machine readability and mitigate errors to some extent, at least, on what the context of the data AI is looking at.
Well, there are multiple threads. I'll start maybe to mention that materiality had been used, and it is in annual and quarterly reports for the financial part. So it's in some ways nothing new to assess risks in reporting by publicly traded companies. I think there are a couple of elements, and I just want to sort of pinpoint to them. You mentioned in the first place that this is sort of an addition to materiality and has a lot of qualitative and judgment calls, where I think it's a combination probably of human interaction and AI, because AI should be a support system for decision making and support, rather than being the one making decisions. I hope not in the short term, at least it's not capable of it. Second point you raised very, very clearly, and we need to think about the supply chain, because a lot of the reporting and the data is not actually, it doesn't exist in the customer, it exists in the suppliers. Scope 3 is an example. Child or labor laws, conformance, child labor laws, right, and so on. So you mentioned, and really it's very important to see how this sets of data can get aggregated to produce a report that, and you raise the issue of the risk. This is where the reports are going, mostly materiality, financial materiality, sustainability materiality at the end are part of the risk assessment of the company, and it's it's very convincing that we need to sit back a little bit and think how we combine all this, so it makes sense to, back to a human reader that has 5 minutes to assess the company.
Yeah, and that's key. How do you get all that across in 5 minutes, right? And especially when you think of one of the uses of AI is that people will be using AI to parse reports to extract the information for whatever particular analysis they're doing at any given point in time. Because information that's relevant to one person in one context here is irrelevant to someone else with doing something else over here. So I think that's part of it. Another big challenge is the nature of sustainability reporting versus sort of financial reporting. A couple of big differences that I've been hearing about. Financial reporting is very numbers based. Well, ESG data, yes, there are certainly numbers in there. It is mixed sort of reporting numbers with a lot more qualitative sort of, we need to explain these numbers a little more so that it does reflect the company's operations and positions and considerations. The numbers alone aren't enough. So there's that. The other thing I've been hearing a lot of is financial reporting. A lot of it is here's where we were, here's where we are, with a bit of future projection, where sustainability is more here's where we've been, here's where we are, and a lot of future projection. So financial sort of now and where we've been a little more with some future projection. Sustainability has a lot of future projection in it. And that's another area AI modeling can help if we have data. So and this is what another thing that's starting to build is we're starting to get some historical data. So it's been really impossible to do good future trajectory modeling of a lot of sustainability issues because they are complex and there's just not enough historical data to really see how taking one action is likely to impact what happens next for a company. So that's been a real blocker for a lot of investment in longer term projects by corporations, is it can be really hard to estimate what's going to be that impact, not just on the environment, of course, but like on, is it a worthwhile investment for the company? That's a number one question. And that's hard to gauge, especially when your projects are sometimes 5, 10, 15 years with a lot of capital invested in them. It's a difficult decision. But as there's more data, we're now able to build models that will help corps make better decisions and lower that risk to help with that analysis. So it's really fascinating to hear a lot about different ways they're trying to pull on what has been done previously with a lot of big reporting like finance, and then also where the differences are, where people are having to spool up new skill sets. And another one I hear about all the time is de-siloing. So with ESG, there needs to be a lot of crosstalk because it pulls on a lot of different skill sets and departments from all over the company to get that ready. And then the other one we hear tons about as well is supply chain, as you point out, right? That's an enormous, enormous ask for a lot of companies. To then, and depending on size, of course, but not just in terms of the company going out and asking all their suppliers for all that data and having to collect it and be responsible for their supply chain. But then also the people within the supply chain now having to provide data to all the people that they supply product to. So if we think about, I don't know, Nintendo providing data to Walmart, it's a lot of data, likely. However, both corps kind of have it and they know how to get it and they have systems in place more or less. When you're looking at another example that we've heard of is an airplane manufacturer, for example, in their operations, they might have really large corporations that have that data more or less on hand, to like smaller machine shops where you have, 10 people making parts, and then you're asking them for all this data and they're like, I don't even know where to start on a lot of this stuff. Like, it's just 10 of us in this shop. Like, there's no sustainability person. So they're, at all levels of the supply chain, people are scrambling a little bit to get this going. And that's why you do see a lot of scope 3 reporting is being pushed back a year or two, or, in the case of the US, it's just kind of parked right now. They're trying to get the rest of reporting requirements going and not even worry about scope 3 at the moment, because it is such a important but difficult ask to get that all going at once. Everyone kind of has to get their own house in order a bit before they can then start reaching out. So, not that it's not important, not that it's not going to happen. I'm pretty confident it will. It's just, it is also, I think, the right thing to do to get that rolling a year or two after companies have gotten used to the idea of collecting their own data first before you start going asking people for others, like other people for theirs. Because you need the systems in place, frankly, to know what to do with it and to handle it correctly.
Again, trying to unpack a little bit. First thing you mentioned, financial reporting materiality versus the sustainability materiality. And in financial reporting, we have something called the balance sheet. And one secret of the balance sheet, you have to do everything possible to balance. You can have an unbalanced balance sheet. Well, in sustainability, we don't have neither the quantitative data nor really the concept of a balance sheet in sustainability. We do a little bit more on the social side and a little bit more on the environmental side, for instance, would be one example for balance sheet. So it's very different, and thank you for pointing to that. The other thing you mentioned also the challenge of data, and I just want to emphasize that actually large suppliers and large customers have multiple suppliers for the same activity. We're looking at AKFI, what we call a tire in cars, and trying to establish the relationship, because there are multiple sets of requirements, different formats, different jurisdictions, right? Some car manufacturers are US centric, some are European, and so on. So just pointing to the complexity, and now trying from complexity and saying, okay, you have to feed the AI with good data. You have to calibrate the AI. Actually, I don't know if many people look at the AI as a measurement system, but it has to be calibrated before it can even can we even talk about being good to use, right? So I have this question on how we calibrate an AI system when we have these enormous sources of data, which are definitely not the same.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful question. And I think that's going to be an ongoing question. It's a hard problem, and it's a bit one of those, it's a hard problem, but without AI, this problem space is just so large and complex. Is it even possible to achieve the type of things we want to do without AI? So the answer, honestly, is it has to be highly supervised and thoughtfully employed in where it makes sense. And we have to, and as the data set grows and as use cases of AI grow, we're going to be able to do more complicated things with it. I think that's going to be the trickiest part, is not just grabbing the hammer all the time for every problem without thinking carefully about, does this need a screwdriver instead? And do we have the instruction manual close at hand, and having a carpenter come and assess it and check the work after. So you asked earlier too about audits and audit trails. I think that is so important, the ability to do that. I know certainly with a lot of disclosures such as the CSRD companies have to have assurance done on the data, third-party assurance, before they can publish that report, saying that someone who's at arm's length has come in and checked that the data look reasonable. The data that's in the report do look reasonable. And so part of that, frankly, is going to be where AI has been employed. Someone with AI expertise has looked at the model and said, yeah, that model looks reasonable for the type of analysis and the type of data that you're doing with it. That's going to be tricky. And, one thing is the building AI to check AI paradigm. And how is that going to work out? In some cases, we can see how that would be super great when it works, and it could be a nightmare if you're reinforcing bias and other things like that. So it's going to be a very interesting time. I think we really need to set up sandbox areas, and I think we have to really be, think about how do we support missteps or failure when it was truly unintentional without punishing people for trying new things, if they're doing it in a responsible, reasonable fashion. And how do we share learnings from when those go a bit sideways and didn't work out as planned or backfired on us, so that we can start learning from each other. I think that's really important at this stage because there's so many new things we're doing.
I'll turn also shortly to Isabella, as we'll be going toward more the social parts of our questions and the organizational parts. But before going there, it looks to me the ESG AI is in the middle of the storm, so to speak, a big storm. And before also asking the question, one observation, when we deal with measurements, we have standards of measurements. We have, the meter is in Paris, the meridians are in Greenwich, and so on. So everything goes to a standard, or at least there are equivalent standards so we can convert easily. How do we come up with a standard to train AI since it's so complex? I mean, it's data input dependent, right? If you have all different data, you have a different result.
Yeah, it's very true. And there's been lots done on how to train AI and then do sanity checks on how good the results are. I think one bit that's tricky with this space is it is complex without a lot of a priori ground truth. So with a lot of AI, we have ground truth data where we know for whatever problem space, if you're doing a good job, you carefully select your ground truth data that you are confident represents the right answer for a number of different scenarios. And then you run your AI and you hold it up next to ground truth and see, well, how close did it get, right? And then that can give you insights as to what's working well and what could be changed so that you're getting closer to this ground truth. When it comes to sustainability, ESG, and AI, there is ground truth in a lot of instances, and in a lot of other ones, we still need to build the data sets to even have ground truth with a lot of things that are happening there, because it is large and the contexts are quite variable. So again, I think that's something we have to really keep in mind is there's no single solution, but there's also areas that are more well-defined versus ones that are less well-defined. And we need to learn from the ones that are more well-defined and then start edging into the ones that are less well-defined or more complex, which honestly is how it is going for most of the field right now.
And from inside the ESG AI, what's how world looks like?
How, sorry?
How the world looks like? How
Oh,
the
pretty
whole
much.
world.
Yeah, no, pretty much like that. So within our company, we're really looking at specific data sets and then building systems where we feel confident that we have enough data to interpret, and that we have enough data to also, and expertise to do sanity checks and make sure that we're getting the type of answers we're looking to do. So there's optimization. We're looking at optimization of many different types of data coming together and helping do sort of a optimization recommender to, again, as a tool for humans to do decision making, where they're weighing a bunch of trade-offs, and then, you know, we're using AI to kind of combine that and look at trends with peers and other such things. So those are some ideas we're playing with, where there is data and historical data in the sorts of questions and optimization problems that we're looking at solving. Yeah, for example.